One moment, Adrianne Jones was a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her. The next, she was gone. Her disappearance a mystery that would uncover a web of betrayal, obsession, and murder. This is the chilling story of how love turned lethal and shattered a town forever. In the peaceful suburban town of Mansfield, Texas, life moved at a slow, steady pace. The soft chirping of crickets filled the nights, and the faint hum of cars on distant roads was the loudest sound you'd hear. It was the kind of place where people felt safe, where neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles, and where kids played freely in their front yards. But beneath this calm and quiet surface, something dark was brewing, something that would shake this small, tight-knit community to its core. Before we dive deeper into Adrianne's haunting story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. The unimaginable horrors she faced could happen anywhere, and staying informed could help prevent another tragedy like this. Don't wait, subscribe now, and be part of a community that seeks justice and understanding. Adrianne Jones was a shining star in Mansfield, the kind of teenager everyone loved. At just 16 years old, she had a spark that lit up any room she walked into. Her bright smile was contagious, and her kindness left a mark on everyone she met. Adrianne had big dreams. She wanted to be a veterinarian one day. Her love for animals was clear in the way she cared for them, always gentle and understanding, as if they were her closest friends. She was everything you'd picture in an all-American teenager, hard-working, talented, and full of life. Adrianne was a top student, excelling in her classes and pushing herself to take on challenging courses. Her teachers admired her dedication, and her friends looked up to her for her optimism and drive. On top of that, she was an athlete. Whether it was soccer or cross-country, Adrianne gave it her all. Even when an injury kept her off the soccer field, she didn't let it slow her down. Instead, she found joy in running, discovering a new passion in cross-country. Life for Adrianne was a whirlwind. When she wasn't hitting the books or running on the field, she was working at her part-time job at Golden Fried Chicken. And despite her packed schedule, she always found time for her friends. Adrianne had a full, vibrant life, one that seemed perfect on the outside. But life isn't always what it seems. Even with her accomplishments and bright future ahead, there were small signs, subtle, almost invisible, that trouble was on the horizon. It's hard to imagine that someone so full of life could be touched by such darkness. Yet, in the midst of her busy and joyful life, a shadow loomed. One that would change everything. Here's a rewritten and expanded version, with simple, everyday language broken into paragraphs for better readability. The world was changing fast, and the town of Mansfield wasn't spared. It wasn't just the bigger cities dealing with problems like gangs, drugs, and rising crime. Even in this small community, those same issues cast a shadow over everyday life. People talked about it, worried about it, and tried to protect their families from it. Adrianne's parents were no different. They came up with strict rules to keep her safe. She had to be home by 9 p.m., no excuses. If she went to the movies, she had to show her ticket stub to prove she'd really been there. They even nailed her bedroom windows shut to make sure no one could sneak in or out. These rules weren't about being controlling, they were about love and fear. They wanted to keep her safe from the dangers they saw creeping into their once peaceful town. But as much as they tried to protect Adrianne from the dangers outside, they couldn't know the real danger might already be lurking closer than they thought. It was a regular Sunday evening, December 3, 1995. Nothing about it seemed unusual. Adrianne was excited because her parents had made an exception to their usual rules. They let her stay up late to talk to her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, who was out of town visiting his family. The house was quiet, except for Adrianne's cheerful voice as she chatted with Tracy over the phone. But then something strange happened. The phone line started to crackle with static. Adrianne, usually so bubbly and full of life, sounded different, quieter, like something was bothering her. Then another call came in. It was David, one of her teammates from the cross-country team. Adrianne answered, and her mother couldn't help but notice something unusual about the conversation. David sounded upset, and Adrianne's tone grew serious as she spoke to him. Her mother felt a flicker of worry in her chest, but she didn't know why. What no one realized in that moment was that this simple phone call would be the last time anyone in the family heard Adrianne's voice. The usual warmth and laughter that filled their home would soon be replaced by an unbearable silence. That silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of loss, confusion, and heartbreak that would linger forever. The life they had tried so hard to protect was about to be shattered, leaving them to piece together the moments leading up to that night, searching for answers they might never find. The following morning, Adrianne's mother woke up to an unusual quietness in the house. She expected the usual hum of the day starting, but instead all she heard was her daughter's alarm clock buzzing loudly. It felt strange, even unsettling. She went to Adrianne's room, her heart already beginning to race, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Adrianne wasn't in her bed. The sheets were untouched, neatly arranged as if no one had slept. At first, she tried to brush off the worry. Maybe Adrianne had gone for an early morning run. That thought quickly fell apart when she saw her running shoes sitting exactly where she'd left them on the floor. Adrianne had slipped out to meet friends before, but she'd never stayed out all night. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. A heavy, cold fear began to grip her heart. Where was Adrianne? What could have possibly happened to her? Meanwhile, 10 miles away, in the quiet countryside of Grand Prairie, a scene of horror unfolded. A man was walking out to his mailbox, enjoying what seemed to be just another peaceful morning on his farm. But his routine was interrupted by something unusual on the side of the road. At first glance, he thought it was a dead animal, probably hit by a car during the night. It wasn't roadkill. It was the lifeless body of a young woman. Her face bore the marks of 2 gunshot wounds, and the sight was so gruesome that it made him stagger backward. Her head was bruised and battered, and her arms and legs were covered in scrapes and bruises, as if she had fought desperately for her life. She was wearing night clothes, a haunting detail that suggested she had been taken right from her bed. The tranquil farmland, usually a picture of safety and calm, was now the scene of an unthinkable crime. The man's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was looking at. Shock and fear washed over him as he turned back toward his house, his steps hurried and unsteady. He couldn't erase the horrifying image from his mind. He knew, without a doubt, that what he had stumbled upon was more than a tragedy. It was something sinister, something that would haunt him and his quiet community forever. The Grand Prairie Police Department sprang into action as soon as the horrific discovery was reported. They sent out a teletype to all nearby police departments, detailing the victim's appearance, her age, height, weight, and any features that could help identify her. This information was like a lifeline in the dark, a desperate attempt to find out who she was and what had happened. It didn't take long for the Mansfield Police Department to connect the dots. The young woman found in Grand Prairie was Adrianne Jones. The news hit the community like a thunderclap. Shock turned to grief, and grief quickly became fear. The peaceful, tight-knit town suddenly felt vulnerable. Adrianne, who had been so full of life and energy, was now gone in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Her name was on everyone's lips, and her face was etched into everyone's minds. The community that once thrived on neighborly trust was now haunted by suspicion and sorrow. The investigation began immediately, and every detail mattered. Adrianne's parents, overwhelmed with grief and worry, sat with the police to provide everything they could remember. They recounted a late-night phone call Adrianne had with Tracy Smith, one of her friends, and a strange call from someone named David. These were pieces of a puzzle the police were determined to solve. Then there was something else. Something that might have seemed small, but carried weight in the investigation. Adrianne's parents remembered hearing the sound of a car engine outside their house shortly after midnight. Their younger son even caught a glimpse of a pickup truck pulling away from the driveway. It wasn't much, but it was a lead, and the detectives grabbed onto it like a lifeline. Every clue was carefully examined, every fact double-checked. The police worked tirelessly, driven by their duty to uncover the truth and bring justice for Adrianne. The town, reeling from the loss, looked to them with heavy hearts and desperate hope. The pressure was immense, but so was the resolve to find answers. Adrianne deserved that much. The investigation soon turned its attention to David Graham, Adrianne's teammate from the cross-country team. At first, David denied having any contact with Adrianne that night. He claimed that he had been at home studying with his girlfriend, Diane Zamora. Diane, a determined young woman with dreams of joining the Naval Academy, shared David's drive and ambition. Together, they were the perfect high school couple, passionate, focused, and with a future that seemed bright and full of promise. But behind the facade of this picture-perfect relationship, something darker was starting to stir. There was an undercurrent of jealousy and possessiveness, feelings that would slowly grow and twist, turning a once seemingly beautiful love story into something unsettling. The police wasted no time in digging deeper into David's background. They spoke with his friends and even went through Adrianne's phone records, trying to uncover any hidden connection between the two. But they found nothing to suggest that David and Adrianne were anything more than teammates. There wasn't even a hint of a close friendship. David agreed to take a polygraph test, a move that would help clear his name, and he passed with no issues. As a result, the suspicion around him started to fade. With this lead running cold, the investigation shifted toward other potential suspects. One name that surfaced was Brian McMillian, a local teenager who worked at a pharmacy close to where Adrianne worked. Brian had become fixated on Adrianne. He would visit the restaurant where she worked, always hoping for a chance to see her. Adrianne, understandably, felt uncomfortable with his constant attention. She often tried to avoid him by hiding in the back of the restaurant, but what began as an innocent admiration quickly escalated into something more dangerous. Brian's obsession within Adrianne grew more intense, and investigators started to take notice. Despite his troubling behavior, they still couldn't find enough to connect him to the brutal crime, and his actions didn't seem to match the level of violence involved. The police first spoke with Brian McMillian, who at first denied knowing anything about Adrianne. His responses were calm, almost too calm, as if he were trying to distance himself from the situation. But when the questioning continued, the cracks in his story began to show. Slowly, he admitted to knowing Adrianne, but he was vague and inconsistent about the details. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Brian told the police he had been at home, drinking to cope with loneliness and depression. The police didn't have enough proof to say he was definitely involved, but his strange behavior raised suspicions. With no solid evidence, though, they had no choice but to let him go, and the investigation continued to unfold in a new direction. Weeks stretched into months, and the town of Mansfield was still reeling from Adrianne's murder. The sadness lingered, like a heavy fog that refused to lift. The community couldn't stop thinking about the young woman they had lost, the laughter she had brought to their lives, now only a memory. Meanwhile, the police kept pressing forward, following every lead, chasing down every scrap of information. They were determined to find who was responsible, but the trail seemed to go cold. Despite the lack of answers, the pressure mounted. The town was watching, waiting for some sign of justice. They demanded answers. The silence in the town was suffocating, and it was broken only by murmurs of fear and suspicion. No one felt safe anymore, and the weight of the loss hung over everyone. As we uncover more disturbing details, ask yourself, how well do we really know those closest to us? If this story has made you think, then don't let it end here. Subscribe now to stay updated, because the truth is darker than you might believe, and we owe it to Adrianne to keep asking the tough questions. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected place, Annapolis, Maryland. Diane Zamora, who was attending the prestigious Naval Academy, dropped a bombshell confession. She told a few of her fellow cadets that she and her boyfriend David Graham were the ones who had killed Adrianne Jones. The confession sent shockwaves through the Naval Academy, and word of it quickly spread. The Mansfield Police Department acted fast, sending detectives to Annapolis to speak with Diane. But when they arrived, Diane denied everything. She claimed that her words had been misunderstood, that it was all just a lie. The Naval Academy, however, took the matter seriously. They suspended Diane immediately and sent her home to face the consequences of her actions. But the story didn't end there. The police knew they needed to talk to David Graham, Diane's boyfriend, who was now at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The interview with David was tense, and you could feel the suspicion hanging thick in the air. David denied being involved in the murder, saying that Diane's confession was completely false. He maintained his innocence, insisting that there was no truth to her statement. But, as the questioning continued, cracks began to show in his story. The weight of the accusation started to break down his calm exterior. David, unable to keep up the facade, finally asked if he could write a statement. It was a small request, but it hinted that he was no longer as sure of his innocence as he had been before. David's confession came in the form of a 4.5-page letter that detailed the horrifying events of the night Adrianne was murdered. In it, David admitted to having an affair with Adrianne, something that had shattered the trust between him and Diane. Stricken with guilt and terrified of losing Diane's love, David confessed to the betrayal. Diane, heartbroken and overwhelmed with emotion, initially couldn't control her pain, but soon her grief turned into rage, and her anger was no longer directed at David, but at Adrianne, the woman she believed had come between them. In the midst of this anger and confusion, a twisted plan began to form. David, consumed by his love for Diane and his fear of losing her, made a fateful decision. He agreed to help Diane carry out something unimaginable. On the night of December 3rd, David called Adrianne, luring her out of her house under the false pretense of wanting to talk privately. What Adrianne didn't know was that Diane was hiding in the trunk of David's car, waiting for the right moment to make her move. As David drove to a secluded area, far from the prying eyes of anyone who could help Adrianne, Diane emerged from the trunk, her anger now fully unleashed. She confronted Adrianne in a fit of rage, and a violent struggle quickly followed. Fueled by jealousy and betrayal, Diane attacked Adrianne with a blunt object, striking her with such force that it left Adrianne severely injured. Despite her desperate attempt to defend herself and escape, Adrianne couldn't outrun the violence that was unfolding. David, frozen for a moment in shock and panic, witnessed the brutality of the scene. In his fear, he pulled out his 9mm handgun and, without hesitation, fired, ending Adrianne's life with a single shot. The two of them stood over Adrianne's body, the weight of their actions sinking in. For a moment there was nothing but silence, the reality of what they had done finally hitting them. Then, in an eerie and twisted moment, their first words to each other were simply, "I love you." The words, meant to signify their bond, were hauntingly empty. Their love had been built on deceit and manipulation, and now it had culminated in a brutal, senseless act of violence. With David's confession in hand, the police returned to Diane, hoping she would confirm the details of the crime. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Diane finally admitted her role in Adrianne's murder. Both she and David were arrested and charged with capital murder. However, their confessions quickly crumbled. Each of them recanted, blaming the other for the crime. David claimed that Diane had acted alone, while Diane insisted that David had been the one to kill Adrianne, driven by rage and guilt. Their statements were a tangled mess of lies and contradictions, each trying to shift the blame to the other. This attempt to escape the consequences only deepened the horror of their actions. The truth, however, was far more disturbing. What began as a seemingly innocent love had turned into a toxic obsession, one that ultimately led them down a dark and destructive path. Their twisted relationship had caused irreparable harm to an innocent life, and now they were desperately trying to avoid the full weight of their crime. The trial that followed became a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the nation. The once quiet town of Mansfield found itself thrust into the spotlight, its peaceful reputation shattered by the brutality of the murder. The courtroom was filled with spectators, all eager to witness the details of the case unfold. Adrianne's parents, their hearts weighed down with grief, were forced to endure each painful moment of the proceedings, reliving the loss of their daughter with every word spoken in court. The trial, which had started as a quest for justice, soon became a public spectacle, with every detail being analyzed and scrutinized by the media. As witnesses took the stand, a chilling picture of Diane emerged. Her cold, emotionless demeanor painted her as a person devoid of remorse, someone who had carefully plotted the murder without hesitation. Her actions, now revealed to the public, showed a deep, unsettling cruelty. After hours of deliberation, the jury found Diane guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. David, found guilty on the same charges, received a sentence just as severe. While the verdicts provided some form of closure to the devastated community, the pain of Adrianne's loss could never truly be erased. Mansfield, once a symbol of peace and safety, was now a place forever marked by the brutal end of a vibrant young life. The town would never be the same, haunted by the memory of what had happened and the girl they had lost. The case of Adrianne Jones sent shockwaves across the country, a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath the surface of even the most peaceful communities. It served as a heartbreaking lesson about how fragile life truly is, and how unchecked anger and obsession can lead to devastating consequences. Adrianne's story became a warning, an unsettling look at the complexities of human behavior and the destructive force of unrestrained emotions. It stands as a reminder that the human heart, capable of deep love and kindness, can also be capable of unimaginable darkness. In the aftermath of the trial, the town of Mansfield was left to pick up the pieces. The loss of Adrianne was a wound that ran deep, one that would forever change the town's spirit. The lively energy that had once filled the streets was replaced by a heavy silence, as if the town itself was grieving the loss of a vibrant young life. It was a quiet reminder of how quickly things can change, how easily peace can be shattered by violence. Adrianne's story is a somber reminder that even in the most serene suburbs, darkness can exist. It challenges us to remain alert, to recognize that danger can be closer than we think, even in our own communities. But it also calls us to create a world where kindness, empathy, and understanding can overcome the darker forces that lurk beneath the surface. A world where compassion drives us, where violence has no place, and where the light of humanity's better nature always shines brighter than the shadows of despair. The pain of Adrianne's loss will forever echo through the lives of those who loved her. But her story doesn't end here. It's a reminder that the truth can be buried, but it must be brought to light. If you're moved by what you've heard, please subscribe, share her story, and join us in honoring her memory by ensuring these tragedies never fade into silence.